Hi, I'm Farley, and my sister didn't just find out I had 18 million, she told everyone I stole it. At dinner, in front of my whole family. But the truth is, that night didn't break me. It confirmed something I had felt my whole life, that they were never really with me, just around me, watching, waiting. They called me selfish, cold, greedy after years of me paying their bills, covering their secrets. And when I finally spoke up, they said I ruined the family. But what kind of family do you ruin by simply telling the truth? The house smelled like rosemary and roast chicken, just like it had every December since I could remember. Veramy mother still insisted on hosting an early family dinner ahead of the holidays, even though the family part of it felt thinner each year. I had pulled into her driveway just after 5 p.m. The porch lights were already glowing against the Oregon dusk, and snow flirted with the edges of the gutters, but never really stuck. Callista greeted me at the door with a smile that felt like it was pressed on with glue. "You're early," she said, stepping aside but not moving far enough for comfort. "Traffic was kind," I murmured. I walked in, slipping off my coat like muscle memory. The living room was full uncles, cousins, their kids running around like it wasn't freezing outside. Everything was warm, except the people. I noticed right away. The seating Chartleway's unofficial was clearly engineered. Callista's place was next to Vera at the head of the table, while mine sat exiled near the far end, close to the kitchen entrance where the cold air crept in every time the door swung. It wasn't the seat that stung. It was the intention. Dinner started quietly, just small talk and obligatory smiles. I pushed my green beans around my plate, nodding when someone asked about work, but offering nothing. I'd learned the hard way nothing I shared here stayed here. Everything was filtered through comparison, judgment, or worse, dismissal. Midway through the meal, Callista cleared her throat and stood. She held a stack of printed papers in her hand, her manicured fingers gripping them like a winning hand in poker. Everyone turned to her, forkfuls paused midair. "I wasn't going to bring this up," she began, an obvious lie. "But I think it's time we had some transparency in this family." My stomach dropped. Callista turned toward Vera. "Mom, I came across something concerning, and I think the rest of the family deserves to know." She held up the papers. "Farley, or dear Farley, has been hiding something. She's sitting on $18 million. And based on these financial summaries, it looks like she siphoned that money from the family trust." A wave of sound rushed through the room, gasps, whispers, a dropped fork. I didn't move. I didn't blink. "That's ridiculous," I finally said, my voice flat. Callista handed the pages to our Uncle Charles, who adjusted his glasses and started reading like he was back in a courtroom. "Is this true, Farley?" he asked, eyes narrowed. Not once did anyone ask how Callista got access to my financial information. Vera didn't look at me. She kept her eyes on the salt shaker, then took a long sip of her wine. "I don't even have access to that trust," I said quietly. "That's not what this says," Callista shot back. Then, as if she had been waiting for the dramatic cue, she pulled a USB stick from her pocket. "Actually, I brought proof." She walked over to the TV in the living room, plugged it in, and opened a document. A financial transfer agreement appeared on screen, full of dense legalese and my name stamped across the top. It looked official-timed, signed, even sealed. It was also completely fake. I knew it the second I saw the signature. It wasn't mine. It was close, but not close enough. And the logo in the footer was outdated, a bank that had rebranded 2 years ago. A detail only someone who lived in paperwork would notice. No one noticed. They stared at the screen, quiet as the snow now falling outside. My heart thudded once, hard, then steadied. I scanned the faces around me, blank, confused, some looking away entirely. I turned to Vera. "Mom?" My voice was smaller than it meant it to be. She blinked slowly, still not looking at me. "If it's true, maybe it's time to share, Farley." That was it. No defense. No question. I felt my body go cold, not from the draft, but from realization. They'd already made their choice. the truth wasn't relevant if it wasn't convenient. I placed my napkin on the table, neatly, like I wasn't unraveling inside. "You've all decided who I am," I said. My voice didn't shake. "Don't be surprised when I decide who I want to be next." I didn't leave right away, but I wish I had. I stepped outside just far enough to feel the bite of the night air. My boots sank slightly into the wet grass, and the porch light flickered as if unsure whether to keep pretending it still worked. I stood there in the cold, arms wrapped tight across my chest, waiting for someone, anyone, to follow me out. No one did. Not my mother. Not Callista. I listened for the sound of the door creaking open behind me. Nothing. Not even a draft of heat from inside. That silence? It wasn't hesitation. It was a choice. You don't walk away from a table like that without hoping someone runs after you. And when they don't, it hits different. It's not just rejection, it's confirmation. That's when I realized silence isn't neutral. It's a verdict. I didn't get in my car. Not yet. Instead, I walked around to the side of the house where the old swing still hung from the oak tree Dad used to trim every spring. I sat down, my legs too long for the seat now, and rocked back and forth until the creaking rope matched my heartbeat. No tears. Not this time. Eventually, I went back and not through the front, but the side entrance. No one noticed, or pretended not to. Upstairs, the guest room still had the same layout from when I was a teenager, but the warmth was gone. A room can remember who mattered. This one didn't remember me. The next morning, I found Vera in the kitchen making instant coffee, like she always did when she didn't want to talk long. I poured my own and sat across from her. We didn't look at each other for a full minute. "You knew it wasn't true," I finally said. "And you still said what you said." She stirred her cup with a spoon that clinked too loudly against the ceramic. "You've always been independent, Farley. You don't need defending." That was her answer. That was all I was going to get. So being quiet while they throw me under the bus, that's what independence means now? Vera folded the newspaper and pushed it aside. "I'm too old for this type of drama over money. It always comes back to money." "It wasn't about money until Callista made it about money," I said. "And now I'm the villain in a story I didn't write." She didn't flinch, just stood up and carried her cup to the sink, rinsing it as if it had betrayed her too. After that, she started talking about which neighbor sold their house and how expensive Christmas lights were this year, like nothing had happened. I drove back to Portland before noon, the radio off the whole way. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat with messages I ignored until one made me stop breathing for half a second. A tag. A link. Callista's profile. She had posted a video taken at the dinner, without my knowledge. The caption read, "Sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, but family deserves honesty. Transparency matters." In the clip, she stood holding the printouts and recited the same lines she'd said to my face. But on camera, she looked composed. Concerned even, like this wasn't a takedown, but a cry for family unity. Comments poured in. "She looks hurt." Poor Callista. I knew that Farley girl was shady. Rich people always hide something. Props for speaking up. Most people stay silent. I stared at the screen until the light blurred. I didn't feel rage, not yet. I felt something deeper. Contamination. It wasn't just my name she dragged. It was my integrity. I called her. She picked up on the third ring. "Well," she said with a little breathy laugh, "that didn't take long. You posted a video without my consent." "It was in a public space," she replied. "Besides, truth always rises, doesn't it? You edited it." "I highlighted what mattered," she said. "You could have spoken up. You didn't." I hung up before my hands started shaking. At work the next day, I noticed the difference before I even stepped off the elevator. Fewer smiles. A good morning that came a beat too late. I opened my inbox and saw 3 messages flagged as urgent. 2 were from clients asking to revisit our terms. The third was from an investor who wanted to pause our quarterly agreement pending clarity. My assistant, Brianna, approached with hesitation written all over her face. "Hey, she said. I don't mean to pry, but the video it's kind of everywhere. Is it true? I looked at her. The same girl who once cried in my office after a breakup and ate chocolate off my desk for an hour. She couldn't meet my eyes. Instead of answering, I said, "Just forward me today's schedule." She nodded and walked away. I buried myself in spreadsheets and contracts, trying to pretend that focus could fix everything, but my mind kept circling back to moments I hadn't let myself replay in years. Photos with only Callista in the frame. Christmas mornings where her gifts were wrapped in ribbons, mine in recycled paper bags. The time she accidentally booked over my college tour to take a spontaneous weekend trip to LA. People say words cut, but sometimes silence does worse. Silence erases. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a pen in hand, not because I needed to write, but because my thoughts needed somewhere to land that wasn't inside me. I opened my journal and wrote one line. If they want war, they'll get it. But I'll fight in my way. That morning, I woke early, long before the city began to stir. The air inside my apartment felt weighted, like it too had witnessed what I'd been through and didn't know how to comfort me. Outside, downtown Portland was wrapped in a gray stillness. The fog hugged the buildings like secrets clinging to cold walls. I made coffee, more out of ritual than need, and sat at the table where unopened mail had been stacking up since before Thanksgiving. Junk offers, nonprofit newsletters, old receipts. I was halfway through the pile when I found ETA, worn, yellowed envelope with my own handwriting on the back. No return address, just a smudged stamp and a postmark from 3 years ago. I opened it, slowly, unsure why my chest tightened as I did. Inside was a receipt. A mortgage payment, the mortgage payment for Vera's house. The final one. Paid in full. My signature sat quietly at the bottom, dated and clean. It all came rushing back. Callista had called me in tears back then, saying Vera was behind on payments, embarrassed to tell anyone. I offered to help. She insisted that if I sent the money, it had to come under her name. "Mom doesn't need to know," she said. "She'd just feel ashamed." And I agreed. I mailed the payment myself. I even wrapped the stub in a napkin like it was a confession too delicate for paper alone. I'd forgotten. Not because it wasn't important, but because I never thought I'd need proof. I called Dorian. He answered on the third ring, voice low. "Hey, everything okay? I need you to look in the kitchen drawer, the one near the sink at Vera's," I said. "There's a stack of old paperwork. A red folder, I think." There was a pause. Then he said, "Give me 5. 10 minutes later, he texted a photo of the original stub. The envelope was still there too, folded but untouched. They didn't lose it. They ignored it. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, creating a new folder on my desktop. The ledger. Inside it, I dragged the receipt image, then opened my email history. Years of messages. Subject lines like, "Can you help cover this?" "Emergency expense, just until next month." All signed by Vera. Some from Callista. None of them had thank you notes. Not even a "got it." I pulled them all in, screenshot by screenshot. The digital archive grew. Bank transfers, forwarded bills, loan payoff confirmations. I hadn't realized how much of their survival had my fingerprints on it. And yet I'd become the villain, the thief, the liar. Later that afternoon, I scrolled through an old family group chat we barely used. Mostly Callista's announcements and Vera's birthday reminders. But then I found it. A message from Vera, dated 2 years ago. "We're all so lucky to have Callista's support. She's done more for this family than anyone, including helping with Farley's college expenses." I blinked. That was false. My entire tuition had been covered by merit scholarships and part-time jobs I held during school. Callista had nothing to do with it. My hands trembled, not with anger, but clarity. They didn't just forget. They rewrote history, and I had let them. Because I kept quiet. Because I didn't correct them. Because I thought it wasn't worth the conflict. But now it was different. Now the silence served them, and it destroyed me. I clicked open a voice memo on my phone and recorded one sentence. They made a story, and I stopped showing up in it. That night, I returned to the envelope. I opened a document file and titled it, The Ledger of Truth. Then I wrote a summary of each incident amount, date, purpose, recipient. I included screenshots, scanned receipts, timestamps, even metadata from original files. I wasn't going to publish it, not yet. But I needed to remember, and more importantly, I needed them to. This wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, about never again letting someone else narrate my intentions, my sacrifices, my place. I wasn't going to beg for memory. I was going to make them remember. The night after I finished compiling the ledger, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Callista's voice from that video, measured, composed, so damn believable. By morning, I had made a decision. I didn't call ahead. I just drove to Beaverton. It was just past 10 when I pulled into the driveway. The wreath was already on the front door, and Vera's car was parked neatly to the side. She opened the door like she expected me. Maybe she did. I need the tax documents from 18, I said, brushing past her before she could protest. She let me in, wordless. The living room hadn't changed. That familiar scent of old lemon polish, the same beige rug, the same family portraits. I stood in front of them while Vera rustled papers in the next room. On the wall, there were 10 photos in gold-trimmed frames. Callista, as a toddler on Vera's lap. Callista at her high school graduation. Callista holding Dorian in the hospital room. Not one image of me. Not even the fake smiles from holidays past. I didn't need to ask. The wall answered for her. While I waited, Dorian stepped into the hallway. He didn't say anything at first. Just glanced toward the kitchen, then back at me. Then he handed me a small leather notebook. I found this in Mom's drawer, he whispered. I think you should read it. I opened it slowly. It smelled like dust and dried ink. On the third page, in a loopy teenage script, were the words, I hate that she's always ahead. If I don't act soon, I'll be the backup daughter forever. My fingers tightened around the binding. It wasn't just envy. It was intent. Page after page, Callista had mapped her resentment like a campaign strategy. Every compliment I ever received was an insult to her existence. Every achievement of mine felt like a theft of her spotlight. None of this was recent. I sat down on the arm of the couch, journal in hand, and let the memories pour back in with a different hue. Callista had offered to mail my scholarship form senior year, said she was going downtown anyway. Weeks later, I learned it arrived too late. I lost that grant. She once peeked at a pitch I was drafting for a business incubator contest. Weeks later, her grad school submission had the same framing, the same title. She said it was coincidence. I believed her. I shouldn't have. This wasn't bad luck. These were moves. I found her alone on the patio after lunch, her phone in one hand, texting with nails that never chipped. I didn't raise my voice. I just asked, did you mean what you wrote? About needing to beat me? About being the backup daughter? She looked up slowly. Didn't flinch. Didn't deny it. Her voice was soft. You were never really one of us, Farley. You were the afterthought. That sentence didn't land like a slap. It landed like a diagnosis. I turned to Vera, who had stepped out behind me. She didn't gasp. She didn't defend. She looked down and adjusted the sleeves of her sweater, like she hadn't heard a thing. That was the last straw. I walked out without another word. The door slammed behind me harder than I expected, and I didn't look back to see if either of them had followed. They wouldn't have. The drive back to Portland blurred through a tunnel of trees and radio static. No music could match the noise inside me anyway. I wasn't angry the way I'd been before. I wasn't shocked. What I felt now was something else, like someone had finally handed me a map to a maze I'd been wandering for years. No more ambiguity. No more second-guessing. No more waiting for someone to say, we were wrong. That evening, I pulled out a new journal. Not the one for facts, the one I kept for clarity. I turned to a fresh page and wrote at the top in capital letters, definitions. Underneath, I made 2 columns. One read, "Who they say I am." The other, "Who I actually am." The first column stayed empty. I didn't care about their definitions anymore. The second started with, "The woman they tried to erase but didn't." That night, I wrote a new version of the Story Me version. One they couldn't edit. By the time the sun rose, I already knew what I had to do. I brewed coffee stronger than usual and opened my laptop like I was clocking in. But this wasn't work, it was clarity disguised as admin. No more playing the quiet one. No more swallowing what they dished out. I started drafting a letter cold, factual, unmistakable. To Vera and Callista, it began. This is formal notification that I am documenting your actions over the past month and prior years for legal and personal clarity. I didn't call them mom or sis. They'd forfeited those titles when they used my silence as a stage to rewrite who I was. The letter laid everything out in plain, unemotional languages: slander, financial distortion, willful manipulation of family dynamics for personal gain. I didn't threaten. I didn't plead. I just stated, with full legal backup, that I was keeping records and expected all communication going forward to be in writing. No heat, just precision. Mid-morning, I pulled out the old storage bin from my hallway closet, the one that smelled like mildew and forgotten years. It held photos, old report cards, and file folders labeled in my handwriting. One manila folder was thicker than the rest. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, folded 3 times. I recognized it instantly. The fake waiver Callista and Vera had asked me to sign when I was barely out of college. Just a formality, Vera had said. You're not the type to worry about inheritance anyway. I hadn't read it then. I trusted them. Now I read every line. It was typed like a legal form, but missing key elements. No witness signatures, no notary seal, and a date that didn't even match the day I'd supposedly signed. It had been pushed in front of me after brunch one Saturday while Vera cleared dishes and Callista checked her phone. I scanned it into my laptop and sent it to Jude. 10 minutes later, he called. "It's invalid," he said. "Not even close to enforceable. You were emotionally coerced, and legally, it wouldn't stand up in traffic court." I should have felt angry. Instead, I felt a slow relief, like a splinter finally worked its way out after years under the skin. "Start compiling everything," Jude said next. "The live stream, the dinner confrontation, the forged documents, all of it." "Already on it," I replied. We shared a quiet pause before he added, "You still want to offer them a way out before this escalates?" "Yes," I said, "but just once." That afternoon, I sat at the small conference table in his office while we outlined the key points. Jude clicked through my screenshots and digital archive like a surgeon examining an X-ray. Neither of us smiled. This wasn't about winning. It was about stopping the hemorrhage. He said something that stuck. People like your sister think they're invincible until you show them paperwork. I called Vera later that evening. I didn't script it. I just let the line ring and prepared for whatever came. She answered. "Farley? This isn't a check-in," I said calmly. "I am calling to let you know I'm formalizing everything. The money, the public slander, the document Callista showed at dinner, it's all being reviewed by counsel." A pause. Then, "You're turning your back on blood?" "No," I said. "I'm just refusing to be bled dry anymore." She didn't say goodbye. Neither did I. I closed the call and sat quietly for a while, staring at the wall in front of me. On it was a framed photo of me alone, taken after the first big award my company won. No one else had attended that ceremony. I hadn't invited them. I'd been preparing for this break for longer than I knew. I opened the ledger on my desktop and added 2 new file scans of the invalid waiver and an audio note summarizing my phone call with Vera. I archived every voicemail from Callista and Vera under a folder named Past. I didn't delete them. I wasn't erasing history. I was just drawing a line between what came before and what would never happen again. Before heading to bed, I printed 2 copies of the letterone for Vera. one for Callista's hand, walked them down to the mailbox. Each envelope was certified, tracking included. The air was crisp, sharper than usual. I stood there for a second, hand on the cold metal of the box, then dropped them in. I didn't expect a reply, and I certainly didn't expect remorse, but I gave them one last out, and I knew they wouldn't take it. 2 weeks. That was how long I waited. Long enough for the certified letters to be signed for by Callista's assistant and Vera's neighbor, no less, but not a single word came back. No call, no message, not even one of Callista's phony, heartfelt social posts tagging me in a half-baked apology. Instead, I watched from a distance as Callista continued painting herself the victim on social media. Captions like "family wounds cut deepest, but truth protects us." She was consistent, I'll give her that. Consistently performative. The silence was my answer, and I knew exactly what it meant. Tuesday morning, I walked into Jude's office downtown, calm and composed, carrying a slim manila envelope. He took one look at me and closed the blinds before I even sat down. "You're sure?" he asked. I nodded. Time to stop giving them chances they won't take. He slid the folder open and pulled out the final piece. The original contract. Not a photocopy, not a scantha document. Stamped, notarized, dated. A trust agreement drawn up years ago that clearly stated I had never been named as a beneficiary. Jude studied it one last time, even though we both knew it was ironclad. If we go public with this, Farley, they'll collapse before they blink. I took a long breath in. Then it's time. By Thursday, I had booked a private session at a media recording suite downtown. The room was neutral gray walls, soft lighting, a single camera set up with just enough distance to keep it from feeling like an interrogation. My friend Angela, a former publicist, sat with me through the prep. She didn't push, didn't coach. She just said, "Talk like you're talking to yourself." I did. I told the truth. From my first job scrubbing floors in a hotel lobby at 16, to the night I pulled my mother out of foreclosure while Callista was in Cabo. I included timelines, financial records, screenshots of transfer confirmations, every number checked, every detail verified. But I didn't name-call. I didn't point fingers. I didn't need to. My voice carried the weight of someone who had been silent too long. Angela uploaded the video to a controlled press account. She said it wouldn't take off right away. But within 48 hours, it did. It didn't go viral the way gossip does, but it didn't need to. Clients started sending messages of support. One investor, who'd been quiet for a week, sent a single-line email. "Glad you spoke." In the family group chat, which had gone dead since Thanksgiving, someone quietly left the conversation. Then another. "I didn't check who. I didn't care." That weekend, Vera called. I let it ring, twice. Then I blocked the number. There was nothing left to clarify. Not anymore. On Monday, I saw Callista's latest post. White background, black serif font. Sometimes the people who cry victim the loudest are the ones who wounded you first. I didn't comment. I didn't share. But someone else did. Beneath the post, buried among likes and supportive emojis, was a single comment from a verified account. "Didn't your sister just drop court-certified proof? Might want to sit this one out." For the first time in months, I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge, not even because I felt vindicated. I smiled because I had done something my family never expected had spoken up, and I hadn't crumbled. I hadn't said much, but apparently I'd said enough. The echo of the last message hung in my head for days. I hadn't replied to Vera's call. I didn't respond to the post Callista made. But people did. People I didn't expect. And that changed everything. It was a little after 8 p.m. when I was still at the office, going over a stack of contracts with Jude. The city outside had already folded into darkness. We were halfway through finalizing our press follow-up when the intercom buzzed. "There's someone here to see you," my receptionist said. "He says it's personal." Jude raised a brow at me. I nodded. "Let him up." When the door opened, I nearly dropped the pen in my hand. "Nathan?" I said, the name falling out of me before I could shape it into a question. Nathan Ellis. Callista's ex from 6 years ago. He looked different now, cleaner, sharper. His gray suit hugged his frame like he belonged in it. But there was something in his eyes. Not rage. Calculation. Jude stood. Nathan reached out to me privately last night. He has something to show you, and he wants it public. Nathan stepped forward and placed a folder on the table. I figured if anyone would understand, it'd be you. Inside the folder were emails, dozens of them, between him and Callista. Some from when they were together, others just months after they broke up. Password reset confirmations, transfers between accounts, documents signed under emotional pressure. She convinced me to let her move money into my accounts. Said she was protecting assets from predatory family members. Said you were unstable and might try to drain the trust. I swallowed hard. There's more, he added. She used my credentials to open 2 separate lines of credit. One's still active. I only found out because a client flagged it during a background check. Jude leaned in. This could end her credibility overnight. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. My body had already gone cold from the confirmation. Same pattern, same manipulation. Just a different victim with a longer fuse. I used to think she was just dramatic, Nathan said. Now I think she's dangerous. I thanked him quietly and promised we'd be in touch. After he left, I walked to the window, looking out over the lights of downtown. How many people believed her because she looked polished? I said aloud. Jude answered from behind me. Most people trust a clean shirt before they trust a quiet room. I pulled up my own files again, my version of the truth. Every line in that ledger had weight. But now, I had something she couldn't spine another voice, one that used to be on her side. Later that night, at home, I couldn't sleep. I found myself scrolling through old emails again, and that's when I found it. A message buried deep in a forgotten thread between Vera and a former family attorney. The subject line, transfer suggestion Callista to manage estate. I opened it. Vera had written, Farley has never asked for anything. She doesn't need to be involved. Callista is better suited for long-term responsibility. Let's make this easy. There it was. Not just a passive betrayal, not a misunderstanding, a strategic exclusion. Vera hadn't just watched this unfold. She had carved the path. I stared at the screen, letting the sentence settle like ash. How many moments had I explained away? How many times had I told myself, they just didn't think it through, when in reality, it was by design? I picked up the phone and called Dorian. He answered immediately. You told me once you wanted the truth, I said. Are you still willing to help me prove it? He didn't hesitate. Whatever you need. I exhaled. The kind of breath you don't notice you've been holding until it leaves you. Back at the office the next day, I turned on the recording light in my private studio. I adjusted the mic, stared straight into the lens, and said, not for YouTube, not for the internet, but to myself, plainly. No more guessing. No more waiting for them to fix it. I'll finish this. The city hadn't changed overnight, but I had. The morning after Nathan's visit and the message from Dorian, I walked into Jude's office with a flash drive in my pocket and a purpose behind every step. He and Angela, my friend and former publicist, were already waiting. Angela looked at me with that quiet nod she always gave before something big. Jude pushed a single sheet of paper toward me. Everything's reviewed, every document, date, name, and the audio. You sure you want to use it? I slid the flash drive across the table. It's time. We booked the recording session for noon. It wasn't dramatic. No makeup artist, no spotlight. Just a camera, a mic, and truth delivered plainly. This isn't about humiliating them, I said quietly as we prepped. It's about ending the performance, letting the facts speak, finally. Angela pressed record. I started from the beginning, my beginnings, working 2 part-time jobs through college, paying off a mortgage that wasn't mine. The years I showed up, gave, covered, and kept silent. My voice didn't crack. I didn't dramatize. I walked through the timeline of events like I would any board meeting, calm, factual, undeniable. When I reached the part about the dinner, I paused. This is what people need to understand, I said. When someone's quiet for years, it doesn't mean they're weak. It means they've been collecting every detail you hoped they'd forget. Then I played the clip. Dorian had sent it the night before, shaking hands and all. A voice recording, low and slightly muffled, but crystal clear in its impact. Callista's voice. I had to get ahead of her before she made us irrelevant. Then Vera, in the background, responding, Farley won't speak up. She never does. That moment stayed in the room longer than anything had said. Angela stopped the recording. Jude reviewed it all once more. You don't owe them another breath, he said. I nodded. But they'll hear this one. We scheduled the segment to drop across my business site, Angela's media channel, and a private link to clients and partners. It went live the next morning. By lunch, my inbox had tripled. But not in the way it used to, not the freezing, doubting silence. Now it buzzed. From clients, we stand with you. From investors, let us know how we can support. Even from past contacts I hadn't spoken to in years, took guts. Glad you finally said something. By 5 p.m., a local business outlet picked up the story. The headline read, CEO's calm disclosure dismantles family accusation. That night, Vera emailed me. Just one sentence, you ruined your sister. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have words, but because she wasn't owed any more explanations. I wasn't the one who'd ruined Callista. That was the consequence of her own script, finally exposed in daylight. Callista's Instagram went private. Her LinkedIn bio changed from community advocate to consultant. Dorian texted me later. They're furious, but they're quiet now. I replied, let them be. The following morning, I went to my favorite cafe, the one I'd avoided for weeks. Not because it was unsafe, but because I hated the way people had looked at me piety, gossip, confusion. This time, when I walked in, a woman at the next table gave me a smile that wasn't fake. It wasn't awkward either. It said, we see you now. I didn't look away. For once, I didn't feel like I had to. The storm had passed, but what lingered was quieter and more personal. Spring had crept into Portland without asking. One morning, I woke up and the rain had softened. The sky stayed pale instead of bruised, and cherry blossoms hung from the trees like they had every year, whether I noticed them or not. I walked more now. Not because I needed exercise, but because I needed space. Quiet had returned to my life, but this time, it didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like a choice. No missed calls, no unread messages, no passive-aggressive texts about family or forgiveness. At the cafe on 21st, people nodded to me differently, not because they wanted gossip, but because they had heard the truth. And when I nodded back, I didn't feel small. I felt real. One afternoon, as I was finishing my latte and folding up my laptop, Jude arrived with a sealed envelope. His expression was unreadable, but kind. From your father, he said. He asked me to hold it. Said to only give it to you if your name was ever questioned. I took it slowly, the weight of paper somehow heavier than it should have been. At home, I sat on the floor with my back to the couch and opened it. Farley, I saw you even when others didn't. I saw how you built everything without noise. You didn't need a spotlight to shine. I know you'd never steal. You built something they'll never understand because you did it alone. And I'm proud of you. Even if I didn't always say it right. The tears came then, but not with the sting it'd known. These weren't about grief or rage. They were warm, cleansing, grief with gratitude stitched in. That week, I made a quiet decision. Vexley & Co. became official. I signed the paperwork, moved my brand under the new name, and filed Vera as estranged on the legal forms. It wasn't meant to punish, it was simply accurate. I also created the Franklin Vexley Foundation, a small scholarship program for young women, overlooked by the systems around them. Girls who were told they were too independent to need help. Girls like me. The first donation came from a woman in Idaho I'd never met, with a note that read, I saw your story. I have a daughter who reminds me of you. Late one night, as the city dimmed down into warm-lit windows and quiet sidewalks, Dorian messaged me. They're still pretending nothing happened. But I saw everything, and I'm proud of you. I didn't respond immediately. I sat with it. Then typed, that means more than you know. Sometimes the conversations you wish you had never happen. There was no apology from Vera, no teary voicemail from Callista, no big family reconciliation at a kitchen table. And that was okay. I imagined what Vera would have said if she had called. Maybe. We only wanted the best for you. We thought you were strong enough to take the hits. And maybe I would have answered, strength doesn't mean silence. It means surviving what should have broken you. A therapist once told me that some forgiveness is lived, not spoken. I used to think that meant letting people back in. Now I know it just means letting them go without dragging their weight behind you. So, I did. And in the space they left, I made room for other things. I hosted dinner one Saturday night, not a big gathering, just the people who stayed. Friends who didn't flinch when it got messy. Colleagues who believed the truth before I had to prove it. We talked about business, books, ridiculous things we'd seen on the news. There was laughter, not forced, not polite. Real. Like I hadn't heard in a long time. After everyone left, I cleaned up slowly, humming under my breath. I lit a candle, made tea, and sat by the window. Then I opened a new notebook. On the first page, I wrote, "They don't get to write me out anymore." I smiled, closed the book, and looked out at the night. Finally, it was quiet, and I was free. Hello, my name is Indigo. I wasn't supposed to come home that night, but something in my chest told me to. When I walked through that door, I saw my sister standing over our blind mother, cane in hand, fury in her eyes. My mom was on the floor, bruised, trembling. I froze. This wasn't the sister I grew up with. This was someone else, someone who'd been hiding behind polished words and family smiles. What would you do if the person you trusted most was the one your mother feared most? I didn't know then that saving her would come at the cost of tearing my entire family apart. But the worst part? No one believed me. Would you? The first thing that hit me was the smell: wet carpet, damp drywall, and something burnt. I pushed the door open with my elbow, my suitcase in one hand, a grocery bag in the other. Thunder cracked somewhere overhead, shaking the house's old bones. The porch light flickered like it had for the past 20 years. Vera was supposed to have fixed it months ago. I wasn't supposed to be here. My conference in San Diego had been canceled last minute due to a storm warning, so I drove home thinking I'd surprise Mom, a little unannounced visit. She always said I didn't stop by enough, but I hadn't heard back from Vera all day. That was unusual. She texted like a project manager, over-communicated everything. I figured she was busy or charging her phone. But this silence felt different. Off, like a stone in my chest that refused to settle. The front door wasn't locked. That alone sent my stomach twisting. Mom might have left it unlocked, sure, she's blind, not careless. But Vera would never allow that. Not in this neighborhood. Not in her house. I stepped inside. The lights were dim, shadows swaying with each flash of lightning. There was no TV, no hum of the radio Mom liked to keep on low. Just silence and heavy breathing. Rough. Shallow. I dropped the bag on the entryway floor and followed the sound. One step into the hallway, and I saw it. Her cane, laid sideways across the hardwood like it had been dropped mid-move. My heart thudded, louder than the rain outside. "Mom?" I called softly, but my voice cracked. The living room came into view, and time stopped. There, in the corner near the fireplace, my mother, my 75-year-old, blind mother, was curled up against the wall, one arm flung over her head as if trying to shield herself. Her nightgown was soaked, and her breathing was jagged. Above her stood Vera, my sister, the woman I had trusted with everything when I moved out 10 years ago. She was holding the cane like a weapon, her mouth twisted with something I didn't recognize: rage, desperation, madness. "Vera!" I shouted. "What the hell are you doing?" She froze, like a child caught in the middle of something she couldn't explain. The cane slipped from her fingers, clattered onto the floor. She's been cursing me, Vera stammered. You don't understand. She's been trying to ruin me. What are you talking about? She won't stop praying in that language, Igbo or whatever. She keeps saying things about my womb. I've tried everything, indigo. Prayers, pills, therapy, no baby, nothing. And she's still here, blind and smug like she knows something I don't. I dropped to my knees beside Mom, gently brushing her damp hair back. Her cheek was bruised. A red welt marked the side of her arm. Mom, it's me. It's Indigo. I'm here, I whispered, heart hammering against my ribs. She moaned, her lips barely parting. She hit me. Again. My fingers were trembling as I pulled out my phone. I dialed 911. My voice dropped to a whisper, not because I was scared, but because I knew what I was doing now. My parents are down there. She's not safe with her. The operator asked for details, and I gave them everything. Address, symptoms, my sister's name. When I looked back up, Vera was gone. I heard the back door creak open. Of course, she always ran when things turned ugly. As I waited for the paramedics, I pressed my palm gently against Mom's chest, feeling for steady breaths. I tried not to cry. Not yet. I needed to be clear-headed when they arrived. In those long minutes, my mind ran backward. Years of being the baby sister. The one they joked was too emotional, too soft. I was the one who stayed back during every argument to keep the peace. The one who mailed checks every month to help with things, even though no one ever acknowledged them. You're not responsible, Vera used to say. You're the youngest. You don't get how real life works. But I did. I just never shouted it from the rooftops. I remembered one birthday, I think I was 26, when Mom called me by accident. She thought she was calling Vera. She started crying, told me she felt like a burden. That maybe she should move into a home so she wouldn't ruin Vera's marriage. That Vera kept saying things were tight. That she kept apologizing when she asked for groceries. It made me feel sick back then. It made me feel furious now. The ambulance lights broke through the window, red and white beams painting the living room in sharp flashes. I heard the screech of the tires on the wet curb, the doors flying open. Paramedics stormed in, one of them crouching beside me. She's cold, he muttered. She was on the floor. I think she passed out from fear, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was firmer. As they loaded her onto the gurney, one of them looked at me. Are you family? I'm her daughter, Indigo. And the person who did this? My sister. He blinked, like he wasn't sure he heard me right. But he didn't ask again. I stood up, grabbed the cane off the floor, and followed them outside. Vera was leaning against her car in the driveway. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but her hair was soaked. She looked at me like she was the victim. I can explain, she said, her voice hollow. I stepped in front of her. You will pay for this. She didn't move, didn't speak, but I saw it. For the first time in her life, Vera didn't have a comeback. Silence can be louder than screams. That's the only way I can explain the ride to the hospital. Mom lay motionless on the stretcher beside me, her lips parted slightly, her breathing shallow but steady. The paramedics worked quietly, professionally, checking her vitals, shining lights in her eyes as if that would matter. I sat at her side, clutching her hand, my other hand gripping the side rail so hard my knuckles ached. I didn't cry. Not then. I couldn't afford to. We pulled up to UC Davis Medical Center just past 10:15 p.m. The ER bay doors flung open, lights blinding as they rushed Mom in. I followed close behind until a nurse stopped me with a palm to the chest. Ma'am, we need space to work. Please wait in the lobby. Someone will update you shortly. I wanted to scream that I was her daughter, that I had just pulled her off the floor of her own living room while my sister loomed over her with a cane. But all that came out was, please be gentle with her. She's blind and scared. The nurse nodded once, the kind of nod that says, we've heard worse, and disappeared behind automatic doors. I stood there, unsure of what to do next, until I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, and there she was, Vera, dry now, hair brushed, a fresh coat of lipstick, calm as a Sunday sermon. She tilted her head, arms folded like she had every right to be there. Where's Mom? She asked, as if she hadn't been in that same house 20 minutes earlier. She's inside, I said flatly. I figured. She looked around like she was surveying her kingdom. Did they ask what happened? They didn't have to. I told them. Her eyes narrowed, but her mouth stayed polite. You always jump to conclusions, Indigo. No. This time, I walked into one. A nurse called her name, and just like that, she turned and floated down the hallway with the grace of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. I watched her disappear through those same automatic doors and felt like the floor beneath me gave just a little. A few minutes later, a young doctor approached and introduced himself as part of the ER team. I asked if I could see my mother, but he told me she was being examined and stabilized. He promised someone would update me soon. I sat down in the plastic waiting room chair. Every muscle in my back knotted tight. Then I heard my name, but not from staff. I need to speak to someone about my sister, Vera said loudly, just around the corner of the nurses' station. She wasn't whispering, she wanted me to hear. She's been under a lot of emotional stress lately, she said. She means well, but she's always been sensitive. Since we were kids, she sometimes sees things that aren't really there. I stood up, walked over, and made eye contact with the nurse she was speaking to. She's lying, I said simply. The nurse looked caught in the middle. Vera turned and gave me a look that was sugar-coated poison. Don't make this harder than it already is, she said sweetly. You're tired. You've been traveling. You're overwhelmed. No, I replied, keeping my voice steady. You're dangerous. That's when Vera played her hand. She turned back to the nurse and pulled out a neatly folded paper. I'm her medical power of attorney. All major decisions go through me. The nurse looked down, read quickly, then nodded. Thank you, Ms. Carver. We'll keep you updated directly. That's when I remembered. Mom once told me over a holiday call, I just let Vera handle the paperwork. It's easier. I thought she meant bill paying. I had no idea it went deeper. I took a step back, stunned, not because Vera had control, but because she had used that control like a weapon. I returned to my seat and did the only thing I could think of. I pulled out my phone and started calling people. Family. Anyone who might listen. First, Aunt Beverly. She answered on the second ring. Bev, it's me. Indigo. Something happened. I caught Vera hitting Mom. She's in the ER right now. A pause. Then, that doesn't sound like Vera. Are you sure Mom didn't fall again? I bit my lip. She was cowering in a corner. Well, she exhaled. You've always been the dramatic one. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. I hung up without replying. Next, I tried Cousin Marcus. Voicemail. Then Aunt Gloria. She answered, but only whispered. You know how families are. Don't stir up trouble unless you have proof. By the time I ended the third call, I wasn't just angry. I was humiliated. It didn't matter what I'd seen, not to them. I stood and walked outside, the automatic doors hissing behind me. The rain had turned to mist. I leaned against a column and closed my eyes, trying to catch my breath. My phone buzzed. A message from Vera. If you try anything stupid, remember who they'll believe. I stared at the screen for a full minute before locking it again. That text didn't scare me. It confirmed everything. She wasn't afraid of what I might say. She was afraid I might be believed, and that, more than anything, told me what I needed to do. I slid to the ground, my back pressed against the cold cement. The windows above me glowed, but they felt unreachable, like a world I didn't belong to. A nurse walked past, glancing down, then continued inside. I wasn't crying. Not this time. I was planning. I took out my phone and opened the voice recorder. My hand shook slightly as I whispered into it. March 19th, 11:47 p.m. Mom is in the ER. Vera is controlling access. Family won't listen. I need to start collecting everything. Next time, I won't just show up. I'll show up with evidence. The doors behind me hissed open again. It was the same nurse from before. She looked tired, but kind. Ms. Carver, your sister asked that you leave. For now. For your own good. I stood up slowly. My legs felt heavy. Is my mother conscious? I can't say. I nodded. Okay, But tell her something when she wakes up. She waited. Tell her I'm not going away this time. The drive home felt like a blur, like I was watching the world from behind a fogged-up window. I didn't turn on the radio. Didn't want noise. Didn't want to be distracted. I needed the silence, even if it pressed in hard against my chest. It was just after 1 a.m. when I unlocked the door to my apartment and stepped inside. The lamp near the couch cast a warm, familiar glow across the living room. I kicked off my shoes without thinking, dropped my keys into the bowl by the door, and stood there for a moment, letting the quiet sink in. The hospital, Vera. The look on my mother's face, her body trembling beneath mine, her voice barely a breath. She hit me, again. I hadn't slept. There was no way I could. My clothes still smelled faintly of antiseptic and cold air from the ER. I didn't bother changing. I just walked straight to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and sat at the table. And then I cried. Not loud, not desperate, just a slow leak, like my body finally decided it was safe to feel again. But I didn't let it last long, because something kept tugging at me, something I couldn't ignore, a memory, a detail that until now hadn't seemed important. 3 weeks ago, it was one of those unseasonably hot days in Sacramento, and I dropped off a bag of groceries at the house. Mom answered the door herself, as usual, her hands moving over the edge of the frame until she found the knob. She was wearing a long-sleeved sweater. I remember asking her, "Mom, aren't you hot in that?" She'd smiled, small and tight. "I get cold easily now." I didn't think twice. Maybe she was being modest. Maybe her medications made her more sensitive to temperature. But now I knew better. She had been covering bruises. I set the water down and went to the hallway closet, pulled down an old storage bin I hadn't touched in over a year. It was the one where I kept sentimental things, cards, letters, random knickknacks from when Mom used to craft. At the bottom, under a stack of unused Christmas cards, I found it, a heavy plastic Tupperware container. She'd given it to me a couple of years ago. "Keep this safe," she had said. "It's just old stories I wrote, nothing important." At the time, I didn't ask questions. She was blind and wanted to hold on to her independence, and I thought maybe it was her way of preserving her mind. But now, I had to know. Inside was a thick, textured book. Braille. My fingers traced the bumps, uselessly. I couldn't read it. I didn't know how. But technology did. I pulled out my phone, downloaded a Braille-to-text app, and carefully began photographing page after page, one by one. The app worked slowly, translating each image into flat, printed English. I waited, I watched, and when the first page loaded, I stopped breathing. She doesn't hit me every day, just when she's angry. When the door slams, I know I have 10 seconds to brace. I scrolled. I used to cry. That made her angrier. Now I stay quiet. I think silence upsets her more. Another. I don't want Indigo to know. She deserves peace. She lives her life with kindness. I don't want that ruined. And another. I'm afraid to sleep. Each entry cut deeper than the last. She had been keeping a record, a diary, not of hope, not of joy, but of pain, hidden in a language most couldn't read. And she'd given it to me. Not by accident. My hands trembled as I copied the text into a document. I cataloged each page, added dates where she had written them. Some were recent, others went back months, maybe more. Vera hadn't just lost her temper. This wasn't an isolated moment. This was a pattern. I sat there for over an hour, reading every entry, each one like a punch to the stomach. But it wasn't just pain that filled me. It was clarity. My mother had been documenting her abuse because no one else would believe her. Or worse, because no one would care. But she believed in me. She trusted that someday I'd read those pages. And now I had. By the time the sun was brushing against the windows and the sky turned a pale, pinkish gray, I'd backed up every file. 3 locations. Hard drive, cloud, secure folder. I wasn't going to lose any of it. I sat back in my chair, my eyes burning, my body exhausted but buzzing. "You wrote this for a reason, didn't you, Mom?" I whispered. Because she knew Vera would try to bury it, and she knew I'd be the one left to dig it up. I opened my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found his name. Michael Reed. Mike was a family law attorney. We'd worked together years ago on a nonprofit case involving senior neglect. He was fair, sharp, and more importantly, he had a low tolerance for cruelty. I drafted a message, fingers hovering over the screen before I typed. Hey Mike, hope you're well. Quick question. Hypothetically, if a blind elderly woman was being physically abused by her caregiver, let's say her daughter, and her other daughter witnessed it but got pushed out legally, what would be the next step? I stared at the blinking cursor for a long time before pressing send. Then I stood up, stretched, and opened the window. The cold morning air rushed in. It stung, but it also cleared something in me. This wasn't going to be like before. I wasn't going to be the one pushed to the side while Vera manipulated everyone around her. This time, I had proof. Real proof. Words in my mother's own voice, even if they were written with dots instead of ink. I made coffee, changed into fresh clothes, and sat back down to wait for Mike's reply. Whatever came next, I wouldn't be the quiet one anymore. By Saturday afternoon, I'd barely slept more than 2 hours. My thoughts were a slow-moving storm, quiet, heavy, impossible to escape. I spent most of that morning double-checking the files I had saved from Mom's Braille journal. Each entry stung in its own way, but I wasn't reading them to grieve. I was preparing. Vera had texted late Friday night. Come by tomorrow. Let's clear the air. Family only. She didn't elaborate. No details, no warmth, just a command disguised as an olive branch. I should have known better than to go, but I did. Because a part of me, deep down, still wanted someone, anyone, to look me in the eye and say, "You were right to speak up." By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sun was already dipping lower, casting a gold hue over the house we grew up in. The same cracked sidewalk, the same porch swing Vera never fixed. For a second, it almost felt like walking into a memory, until the front door opened. My Aunt Valerie greeted me. She had that tight smile she always wore when she was about to say something condescending but wanted to sound polite. "Indigo," she said. "Glad you could come." I stepped inside and instantly felt it, an energy I couldn't quite name. Not warmth, not welcome, just rehearsal. Everyone in that living room had been waiting, seated like jurors who already knew the verdict. Uncle Gerald sat beside her, legs crossed, arms folded. On the far couch sat Vera, legs crossed neatly at the ankle, holding a folder. Next to her, Aunt Darlene stared down at her phone like she was waiting for a commercial break. Vera looked up with a practiced smile. "We all love Mom," she began. "But we need to talk about your behavior, Indigo." It landed like a slap. I didn't speak right away. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out 2 items. A printed set of Mom's Braille journal entries, translated, labeled, dated, and a photo of Mom's bruised arm, time-stamped. I placed both on the coffee table. "Here's what I came to say." Vera didn't even glance at them. She simply said, "You've always had a vivid imagination. You latch onto things and spiral. This isn't new." Aunt Valerie nodded, chiming in like they'd planned it. "You've always been the sensitive one. We're not attacking you, sweetie. We're just worried." Uncle Gerald leaned forward. "Are you sure Mom didn't fall? You know she's unsteady. And if she was really being hurt, why didn't she ever tell us?" I looked at them, baffled. She's blind. She was scared. And she did tell us, through that journal. Vera picked up her folder and, with an almost theatrical flourish, pulled out glossy printed photos of Mom smiling at a barbecue, holding a grandchild, sitting peacefully in the backyard. "If I was hurting her," Vera said slowly, "would she look like this?" I stared at the photos. They were old, from last year, before things got worse. But they were enough to confuse anyone who wanted to believe everything was fine. I took a breath, my voice lower now. I put a camera in her room. Heads turned. "I installed it 2 weeks ago," I continued. "I didn't tell anyone. I needed to be sure." Vera's face didn't flinch. She just cocked her head. You mean you secretly recorded in a private space? That's illegal. I checked the laws. In California, I can record in a private residence if I'm the one who lives there and there's suspicion of elder abuse, and considering I still have mail addressed to me at that house, I qualify. Aunt Darlene looked up, finally interested. So what did it show? I opened my phone, pulled up the app, and stopped. The folder was gone. Not just missing, wiped clean, no thumbnails, no cached files, nothing. My heart plummeted. I backed out, checked my cloud storage, same result. I looked up at Vera, who was already smiling. You know, tech glitches happen, she said sweetly, especially when you don't know what you're doing. You deleted it, she shrugged. Or maybe you never had anything to begin with. Uncle Gerald cleared his throat. Enough of this. Indigo, you need to stop tearing this family apart with these accusations. Mom is old. She's confused sometimes. You're the one causing chaos here, not Vera. Something inside me gave way, but not in a crumbling kind of way, more like a snap. The sound of steel settling into place. I reached across the table, picked up the printed journal entries, and stood up. No one tore this family apart. You just didn't see it happening. Or you chose not to. No one spoke. I didn't wait for them to. I walked out of that house, the same one where I used to play hide and seek in the hallway, where Mom used to hum while folding laundry, where I once thought family meant protection. The sun was lower now. Shadows stretched across the yard. I unlocked my car, tossed my bag into the passenger seat, and was about to drive off when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Voicemail. I listened. I used to clean for your sister. I saw things. I want to talk. The voice on that voicemail stayed with me long after it ended. There was something in the way she said, I saw things, that tightened every muscle in my body. It wasn't the fear in her tone. It was the certainty. I spent the rest of Saturday evening going over the digital files again, making sure I hadn't missed anything. Then I replied to the number. Can you meet tomorrow? The response came just after midnight. Yes, Corner Cafe on 26th and N at 2. By the time Sunday rolled around, I had barely slept. But it wasn't exhaustion I felt, it was purpose. For the first time since that night in the living room, I felt like someone might actually listen. I arrived 15 minutes early. The cafe was quiet, tucked away between a bookstore and an old tailor's shop. I sat at a table by the window, a folder in my bag containing the printed journal entries and side-by-side comparisons of Mom's old and recent signatures. I didn't want to scare this woman off by throwing everything at her, but I needed to be ready. She arrived right on time. Alandra was older than I expected, maybe late 50s. She moved slowly, carefully, like someone who had spent most of her life working with her hands. Her gray coat was buttoned to the neck despite the warmth of the afternoon, and her eyes scanned the room before landing on me. Indigo? I nodded and stood to shake her hand. Her grip was soft but steady. Thank you for coming, I said. I almost didn't, she admitted, sliding into the chair across from me. I've kept this to myself a long time. You said you worked for my sister? She sighed. 3 months, just enough to learn what kind of person she is. We ordered coffee. Mine sat untouched. Alandra didn't dance around the subject. Your mother, she was never treated right in that house. From the first day I started, I could tell something was off. The way she flinched when Vera entered the room. The way she froze up when I asked if she needed help getting outside. She didn't say anything, but her body did. I felt a familiar knot tightening in my throat. Did you ever see her get hurt? Not directly, but I heard things. Doors slamming, shouting, things breaking. Once I found her in the hallway, trying to make it to the bathroom alone. No cane, no help, just her hands on the wall. She was shaking. My hands curled into fists on the table. Why didn't you say something? I did. Quietly. I called a friend who works in elder care. But unless there's proof, unless she was willing to report it, they said nothing could be done. She paused, then reached into her bag and slid a folded piece of paper toward me. I kept this, just in case. It was a photocopy of a legal document, power of attorney, Leocadia Carver, dated February 2nd, signed, barely. She had the flu that week, Ilandra said. Burning up. Couldn't speak clearly, couldn't hold a spoon, and your sister shoved that paper in front of her, told her it was just an insurance update, handed her a pen, she signed it without even asking. I unfolded the paper and compared the signature to one of Mom's older ones I had brought. They didn't match, not even close. Would you be willing to testify? Ilandra hesitated. I don't know. I've got my own job to think about, my own life. But maybe, if it means she's safe. I nodded, not pressing her. She took a sip of her coffee, then looked at me with something close to guilt. I wish I'd done more. You're doing something now, I said. That counts. We sat in silence for a while. Then she stood, adjusted her coat, and said, Be careful with your sister. She doesn't lose gracefully. After she left, I didn't move for a long time. I just stared at that forged signature and thought about all the ways Vera had turned our mother's weakness into an advantage. By late afternoon, I was back home, at my desk, building the beginnings of a case. I printed the Braille entries, labeled the dates, matched them to times Vera had been home. I pulled the high-resolution photo of the bruises from my camera roll and added it to the folder. I even reached out to Nancy, a retired social worker I'd once worked with, who had visited Mom last year during a state check-in. She said she remembered some odd tension in the house, but had chalked it up to caregiving stress. I'll check my notes, she said. Maybe there's something I missed. As I worked, the afternoon melted into evening. By 5 p.m., I had scanned everything, cataloged every detail. My hands ached, my back sore, but my mind felt clear. I picked up my phone and typed the message slowly, choosing each word with care. You used to ignore me. Now you'll need to answer me. I'm giving you one chance to stop this. I hit send, read at 3:42 p.m. No reply. And I knew that meant war. After hitting send on that text to Vera, I didn't expect an immediate response, but I watched the status bar anyway. Read. That was all I got. No dots, no typing bubble, just that word staring back at me like a smirk behind a locked door. I'd already prepared a digital case folder, scanned documents, side-by-side signature comparisons, journal entries from Mom's Braille notebook, photos of the bruises, and Ilandra's testimony, all saved under the innocuous name Project L. But I wasn't relying on Google Drive alone. I backed everything up to 2 encrypted USB drives. One I kept in my purse, the other I taped beneath the drawer in my kitchen. And then, the final piece, I added a video. A week earlier, our neighbor's outdoor security camera had captured something. A shaky black and white clip, but clear enough. Vera, yelling, dragging Mom down the front steps in broad daylight. Mom's feet barely moved as she was pulled toward the car, her cane left behind on the porch. I didn't even know the neighbor had caught it until she stopped me outside the mailbox and said, I'm sorry if this is none of my business, but something about this didn't sit right. She handed me a flash drive, said she didn't want to get involved but thought I should have it. That video was now part of my file. I crafted an email to a law firm in the city that specialized in elder abuse and probate fraud, known for going up against family members who manipulate legal control over aging relatives. The email was short and to the point. No emotional flourishes, just facts, time-stamped files, and a clear subject line. Request for urgent legal counsel, abuse and fraudulent POA. It was sent before midnight. Then, for the first time in what felt like weeks, I sat still. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the fridge. My phone screen was dark, my laptop lid shut. I stared at the wall and waited, for anything. The silence stretched until it wasn't silence anymore. It became dread, anticipation, the pause before something breaks. And then, just after 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Voicemail. I played it, holding the phone close to my ear. The voice was distorted, run through some cheap audio filter, but the message was clear. You should have stayed out of it. If you don't, you'll go down with her. Accidents happen. Think about it. Click. I didn't flinch, not at first, but the echo of those words lingered in the room like smoke. I saved the voicemail and forwarded it immediately, first to the lawyer's intake email, then to Officer Helen Rosas, a detective I knew from my time clerking at the courthouse. She'd handled domestic cases with a rare mix of tenacity and patience. We weren't close, but she respected paper trails, and I had one long enough to reach her desk. Then I sat back, pulled the blinds, and looked out into the hallway. It was still dark, but I saw movement under my door. Just a faint shift in the light. Probably nothing, but still, I got up, checked the locks twice, and opened the drawer under the sink. I pulled out the mini security cam I'd bought after Mom's fall last year. I hadn't needed it then. I needed it now. An hour later, the camera was mounted, synced, and running. It had night vision, cloud backup, and a motion alert feature that would ping my phone the moment something passed within 10 feet of my door. I texted Sam, a former co-worker and the only person I trusted completely. "If anything happens to me," I wrote, "check my cloud folder, INDG Truth. Password is the name of the hospital Mom's in, all caps." He replied instantly. "Got it. You okay?" "I will be." I set my phone down and grabbed Mom's journal. The real one, the Braille version I hadn't touched since translating it. I flipped to the last entry. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but if Indigo comes home, I'll be okay. I just have to hold on." I closed the journal and pressed it against my chest. The air in the room felt heavier, not oppressive, just full of something unspoken, something between fear and fire. I wasn't scared, not anymore. I was angry and awake. I opened my laptop again. I clicked over to YouTube, opened a new upload tab, and dragged in a pre-recorded video. A simple message from me to whoever needed to see it. "If anything happens to me," I began in the video, my voice calm, "this wasn't an accident. You'll find proof in the files. My name is Indigo Carver. My mother is Leocadia. She's been abused, manipulated, and silenced. But not anymore." I set the video to private, scheduled it to publish in 48 hours. Then I went into the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared into the mirror. "It's not just about protecting her anymore," I whispered to my reflection. "It's about exposing you." After that final upload, the next few days moved like molasses, thick, heavy, and unrelenting. I had no way of knowing if Vera was panicking behind the scenes, but on the surface, she was calm as ever. Not a single response to my text, not a call, just silence. Until the envelope arrived. It came on a Wednesday morning, delivered by certified mail. I opened the door still in my robe, coffee in hand, and signed without thinking. But the second I saw the return address, Sacramento County Superior Court, my stomach clenched. Inside was a copy of a legal petition, request for restraining order, filed by Vera Carver, claim, harassment, defamation, psychological intimidation. The words blurred as I read them. It was like she'd beat me to the punch, dragging me into court before I could do the same. There it was, her name on the paperwork, a statement claiming I was emotionally unstable, prone to obsessive behavior, and a potential threat to the well-being of our mother. A pre-hearing was scheduled for Friday. Just 2 days. She didn't just want to silence me, she wanted to destroy my credibility before I had a chance to speak. I sat down hard on the edge of the couch, the papers still trembling in my hands. It took everything in me not to scream. But instead, I did what I always did when cornered. I went back to the evidence. That night, I reopened every folder I had organized, cross-referenced dates, rewatched the neighbor's footage, checked the time-stamped medical records. Everything still held up. And then I remembered something I hadn't touched in days, the pillow. It was one of the last things I packed from Mom's bedroom before the ambulance took her away. She had always insisted on using that old floral pillow, said it helped her sleep. What I hadn't realized at the time was that I'd hidden a voice recorder inside it weeks earlier, tucked deep within the lining. I'd placed it there quietly one afternoon, after hearing another one of Vera's outbursts through the hallway. I had downloaded the file, labeled it, and completely forgotten it in the chaos. Now I pulled it up. The audio crackled at first, like distant radio static. Then voices emerged. Vera's voice, sharp and cold. "Say it. Say you're sorry for ruining my life." A pause. Then my mother's voice, small and trembling. "Why do you hate me?" It wasn't long, barely 2 minutes, but it was enough. I stopped the recording and just sat there, my hands shaking so badly I could barely breathe. That was it. That was the nail. Friday came fast. I arrived at the courthouse early, file folder clutched tightly in one hand, jaw set like concrete. I wore gray slacks, a clean blouse, and not a trace of makeup. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted truth. The courtroom was quiet, only a few people inside, most waiting for their own hearings. Vera sat near the front, hair pinned, jacket crisp, her lawyer beside her. She looked like the poster child for composure. I took a seat across from her. She didn't look at me once. When the judge finally entered, we all stood. Then it began. Vera's lawyer spoke first. Calm, articulate, efficient. "Miss Indigo Carver has displayed escalating behavior in recent weeks, including uninvited surveillance, obsessive messaging, and false allegations without evidence. My client fears for her safety and that of their shared mother." Vera herself stood and added, "I've always cared for our mother, always. But Indigo, she's not well. She sees things that aren't there. She's convinced herself that I'm someone I'm not." A murmur passed through the back of the room. A few heads nodded. The judge took notes. I sat still, every part of me screaming to speak. But I waited. Then my turn came. I stood, opened my folder, pulled out the photos of bruises, a copy of the fraudulent power of attorney. Then, without flinching, I played the pillow recording aloud. The courtroom hushed, completely. Vera's voice. Live. "Say you're sorry for ruining my life." Followed by Mom's quiet weep. "Why do you hate me?" It was only seconds, but the effect was seismic. Someone whispered in the back. "That's her voice. That's Vera." The judge looked up sharply. Vera's lawyer shifted in his seat. When it ended, I let the silence speak. The judge cleared his throat and said, "I'll need time to review all materials presented. A decision will be rendered within 48 hours. And that was it. As I gathered my papers and turned to leave, I felt eyes on me, some sympathetic, some confused. One woman, sitting near the aisle, gave me a small nod. I didn't know her, but I nodded back. Outside the courtroom, my phone buzzed, a call from Aunt Valerie. I debated answering, then did. Her voice was tense. "Even if she did it, did you really have to expose her like that? You ruined our name." I didn't reply right away. Then I said calmly, "No, she did. I just turned the lights on." And I hung up. Back at home, I poured a glass of water and sat at the kitchen table, the folder of evidence now half empty. I looked toward the hallway camera, still blinking, still watching. Mom's diary sat on the counter beside me. I hadn't opened it in days. I flipped it open. "I don't need her to be punished," one entry read. "I just need someone to believe me." Well, someone had. Now the rest would follow. The courthouse felt colder that morning, despite the warm spring sun filtering through its tall windows. I'd never seen so many people in that room. Reporters, neighbors, and unfamiliar faces packed the benches, all waiting for something they didn't fully understand. Mom sat beside me in her wheelchair, her hand resting lightly over mine. It was the first time she'd returned to this building since Dad passed. Her back was straight, her chin lifted. Despite the bruises still faint on her forearms, she looked composed, stronger than I'd seen her in months. We were early. I needed us to be. The room gradually filled with low murmurs, heels clicking against tile, papers shuffling. Every time someone entered, my heart jumped, until finally, Vera walked in. She was dressed like she was attending a brunch, ivory blouse, navy blazer, subtle gold earrings. Her lawyer trailed behind, adjusting his briefcase. I caught her glance briefly, just enough to see she was still clinging to the performance, still hoping to win by polish. She didn't approach us. The bailiff called the room to order, and the judge stepped out, glasses perched low, his expression unreadable. "All rise." We did. My mother's hand gripped mine a little tighter, and I squeezed back. "Please be seated." The judge began reading through the summary of the hearing. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. In light of the audio evidence submitted and the inconsistencies within the submitted power of attorney documents, he paused, his gaze lifting to meet Vera's for the first time. This court finds sufficient grounds to issue a permanent protective order for Ms. Leocadia Carver. Further, the court is recommending a criminal investigation be opened concerning possible violations of elder care statutes and suspected document fraud. Gasps fluttered through the crowd, like birds startled from a tree. I didn't look at Vera right away. I was too focused on Mom's shoulders, which had sagged just the tiniest bit, as if she'd exhaled a breath she'd been holding for years. The judge banged the gavel once. "Miss Carver," he addressed Vera, "you will be taken into temporary custody pending further review by the DA's office. You may speak with your counsel privately." Vera stood slowly, her face cracked, just a flicker. She opened her mouth as if to object, but no words came out. Her attorney leaned in, whispering quickly, and moments later, 2 deputies approached. Flashbulbs from the back of the courtroom popped as the camera phones came out. It all happened quietly. She didn't scream, didn't cry, but the smugness, it dissolved like sugar in hot water. I finally looked at her, not to gloat, not to taunt, just to see. She met my eyes, and in that moment, I saw the difference between us. I had fought with proof, not pride. I had endured quietly, and then spoken clearly. Mom leaned toward me. "Is it over?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "It's just beginning." After court, as we made our way through the crowd of reporters, a woman thrust a microphone toward me. "Miss Carver, are you planning to file civil charges as well?" I kept walking, guiding Mom's wheelchair, but paused just long enough to answer. "We're not looking back. We're rebuilding, one woman at a time." The cameras followed us down the marble steps. I shielded Mom's eyes from the light as we reached the curb, where a transport van waited. Sam, my old co-worker, opened the side door and gave us a soft smile. He didn't say anything about the reporters. He just asked if we wanted coffee on the way home. "Yes," Mom said quickly. "Decaf, though. I'm still on doctor's orders." The ride was quiet. We didn't need to talk. That afternoon, after settling Mom back into my apartment, I made tea and sat with her on the balcony. The city buzzed below us, but up here, it felt distant. Calm. "You don't have to be afraid anymore, Mom," I said. She didn't answer right away. Then she turned to me and said, "I never was. I was just waiting for you." It broke me, not with sadness, but with release. Later that evening, a local news station ran the headline, "Sister found guilty in elder abuse case, protective order granted, criminal charges pending." They played the audio, briefly, and shared stills from inside the courtroom. But they also included a clip from earlier that day, after the judge had ruled, when Mom addressed the press. She had leaned into the microphone and said, "No mother should fear her child, and no daughter should have to fight alone to be heard." The quote went viral overnight. By the time I lay in bed, my phone was full of messages, from strangers, from other caregivers, from adult children who had once been called dramatic or too emotional just for speaking up. Not all of them were kind. Some accused me of destroying my family for attention. One email read, "What kind of daughter turns on her own blood?" I deleted it without reading the rest. But one message stopped me cold. It was from someone I didn't know. No name, just a subject line. "Thank you." Inside, it said, "My sister hit our mom too. We all stayed silent. Now Mom's gone. I wish I had done what you did." I closed my eyes and let the weight settle where it needed to. This wasn't a victory lap. It wasn't revenge. It was justice. And it was long overdue. 6 months later, the sun poured through the tall windows of our community center like honey. Slow, golden, warm. The room buzzed gently with quiet voices, soft footsteps, and the clinking of teacups. It was a modest space, painted in calming blues and lined with worn chairs and tables donated from 3 different churches, but it was ours. And when I say ours, I mean mine and Mom's. The sign out front read, "Carver Center for Elder Dignity." We'd opened the doors 3 months after the court ruling, with funding from a local nonprofit and the help of a few retired social workers who had once tried, quietly, carefully, to report what they'd seen at Vera's house. I sat on a wooden bench near the back, watching as Mom stood at the podium, reading her speech. She was thinner now, more fragile in her movements, but her voice, though quiet, carried with the weight of someone who had spent too long being ignored. "I am not here as a victim," she said, both hands resting on the edge of the podium. "I am here as a mother who was believed." The room fell still. No child should have to beg to be heard. No elder should wonder if asking for help will cost them their family. Abuse doesn't always look like bruises. Sometimes it looks like silence. The audience, older folks, advocates, survivors, nodded, some with eyes already glistening. I recognized one woman who had flown in from Oregon to tell her story. A man in the third row held a framed photo of his mother, lost last year in a similar situation. And yet, in all that pain, there was a strange, tangible hope in the air. Because we were naming it, breaking it open, and refusing to look away. After Mom stepped down, people clapped, not politely, but deeply. A standing ovation in a room where most had forgotten what it felt like to stand tall. As the event wound down, I stepped outside for air. The fall breeze carried that dry California scent, eucalyptus, pavement, and something crisp. Before I could finish a breath, I felt a tap on my arm. A young woman, maybe in her late 20s, stood beside me. Her eyes were wet, but her smile was steady. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to interrupt." "It's okay," I replied. "What's your name?" "Jessica. My aunt went through something like your mom. It tore our family apart. No one would believe her, and I didn't know what to do." I nodded, waiting. "Your story, it gave us words. She's living with me now. We're figuring it out." I smiled, not wide, just enough to let her know I heard her. "You did something now," I said. "That's what matters." She exhaled, as if she'd been holding that story for years. When I returned home that evening, Mom was already asleep in the room next to mine. We shared the apartment now. Simpler, safer, quieter. I poured myself a glass of water and sat at the desk, rifling through old papers, looking for something else entirely when I found the drawer. Tucked in the back, wrapped in a yellowing envelope, was a photo I hadn't seen in years. It was me, as a baby, cradled in Mom's arms. Vera had once tried to throw it out, said it was just clutter. I'd pulled it from the trash without saying anything, held on to it like a secret. I turned it over. There, printed in raised braille, was a message I hadn't known to look for back then. "My indigo, my true light in the dark." The words hit me harder than anything the courtroom ever had. The next morning, I received a letter. Official seal, county office return address. I knew what it was before opening it. Vera had accepted a plea deal. No jail time, but she'd agreed to a full public apology, the permanent loss of her financial certification, and mandatory community service at elder care centers across the county for the next year. I held the letter for a moment. Then I lit a match and burned it over the sink. "Let the past take her," I whispered. "Not me." The final weekend of October, we drove up to the lake, just Mom and I. No phones, no inboxes. Just wind, trees, and water that shimmered like melted glass. We sat in silence for a long time before I asked, "Do you ever wish things had gone differently?" She didn't hesitate. "No. It brought us here, didn't it?" I rested my head on her shoulder as the sun dipped low over the hills, painting everything in amber. Her skin was warm beneath my cheek, and her arm wrapped around me gently, like she had all those years ago, before silence grew sharp, before truth got buried in family secrets. It was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was peace. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was fighting to be heard. I thought I came home to save her. But maybe she saved me too. Sometimes, the people who hurt us the most are the ones we're told to trust without question. This story wasn't just about family, it was about courage and what it takes to speak up when silence feels safer. So let me ask you, have you ever been dismissed in your own family for telling the truth? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your story.
And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that reveal what happens behind closed doors.
Hi there. I'm Celine. My mom kicked me out of her wedding, her big day, said I wasn't good enough to be part of it. But that wasn't the worst part. Behind the flowers, the fancy dresses, the picture-perfect smiles, they were hiding something bigger. They'd spent years erasing me, not just from the guest list, but from the family, from the future. And when I finally walked away, everything they'd built came crashing down. But here's the thing. When your own mother turns you into the villain of her fairy tale, what choice do you have? You think the wedding was the real drama? Wait until you hear what happened after. It was almost closing time at my flower shop in Charleston when my phone buzzed on the counter. The soft hum of the AC blended with the faint scent of lilies and damp eucalyptus hanging in the air. I was trimming the last bouquet of the day, the kind of peaceful moment I usually enjoyed, until that text shattered everything. Celine, I think it's better if you don't attend the wedding. It's for the best. For a second, I thought I'd misread it. My fingers froze over the stems, my thumb still pressing the shears mid-snap. I blinked, rereading those cold, calculated words from my own mother. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was real. She didn't want me there, on her wedding day. I stared at the screen as if I could will the words to change, but they didn't. They sat there, flat and final, like a verdict handed down in a courtroom I didn't even know I was being tried in. It wasn't the first time my mother, Drusilla, had decided I wasn't good enough. But this was different. This was the final nail. My chest tightened, a slow, dull ache spreading beneath my ribs. I glanced around my tiny shop, where every corner held memories of me holding this family together. And now, they had decided to move forward without me. I set the shears down and leaned against the counter, the weight of the text crashing over me like cold water. Then, as if my mind needed to torture me further, the memory hit. It was a month ago, during one of those early May mornings when the Charleston air smelled like rain and magnolia. I had just finished arranging peonies when my mother walked into the shop, elegant as always, her smile sharp as a knife. She didn't waste time. "Celine, we need to talk," she said, voice tight, eyes avoiding mine. I wiped my hands and waited. "You don't really fit the image we're going for," she continued, tone so polished it cut deeper. "The bridesmaid thing? Maybe it's best you step back." The words sliced through me that day like paper cuts, thin, precise, and somehow more painful because of how politely she delivered them. I'd laughed awkwardly, thinking it was a bad joke, but her face told me it wasn't. Now, a month later, she had made it official. Not only was I not standing beside her, I wasn't welcome at all. I walked slowly to the back of the shop, shutting off the lights one by one, letting the shadows creep in as the sun dipped below the Charleston skyline. My legs felt heavier with each step, my chest tightening as my mind kept replaying that message. How did I get here? How did I become the outsider in my own family? My mind flashed back to the countless nights I stayed up, covering rent when Mom was short, helping my sister Aurelia clean up her messes, taking care of everyone while no one ever thought to check if I was okay. And now, I was nothing more than a liability in their perfect little narrative. My phone buzzed again. Aurelia had posted a photo on Instagram. The perfect family wedding, no drama, just love. The caption sliced deeper than any text. The picture? My mother, Aurelia, and a circle of smiling bridesmaids laughing under Charleston's soft evening glow. I wasn't in it. I wasn't even mentioned. That's when something inside me shifted. Something quiet, heavy, but sharp. I locked the shop, the keys cold against my palm. My footsteps echoed on the pavement as I walked home, every sound amplified in the thick, humid night. By the time I reached my apartment, I didn't feel sadness anymore. I felt hollow. Standing in front of my bathroom mirror, I studied my reflection like I was looking at a stranger. My voice cracked the silence when I whispered, "If they've erased me, maybe it's time I erase them too." No more waiting to be invited. No more hoping for crumbs. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing until exhaustion finally dragged me under. The next morning, I woke up to a name I hadn't heard in months lighting up my phone. The name glowing on my phone screen stopped me cold. Junia. I hadn't heard from her in months, not since that last family dinner, where she quietly slid me an extra plate and murmured, "You shouldn't let them treat you like this." She was the only one who ever looked me in the eye when the rest of them pretended I wasn't even there. So when her name popped up at 7 in the morning, I already knew it wasn't good. I answered anyway. "Junia?" Her voice came through, hushed, almost apologetic. "Celine, I didn't want to be the one to say this, but Mom asked me to call you." My stomach dropped. "She wanted me to make sure you don't show up today," Junia continued quickly, as if ripping off a Band-Aid. "She said it's better for everyone's peace." There it was. That phrase again. Peace. As if my existence had ever disturbed theirs, like a storm cloud ruining their sunny little world. I didn't respond right away. I let the words settle in the silence, heavy and sharp. "Message received," I finally said, my voice flat. Junia tried to soften the blow. "Celine, I don't agree with her. You don't deserve this." But I'd already tuned her out. It wasn't about whether I deserved it anymore. They'd made their decision. After the call ended, I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the sunlight slicing through the blinds. Outside, Charleston was stirring awake, church bells ringing, birdsong floating on the breeze, the hum of wedding preparations everywhere. It was supposed to be my mother's perfect day, and apparently it required me to vanish. The walls of my apartment suddenly felt too small, the air too heavy. I grabbed my keys and jacket without thinking, needing to move, to breathe, to not feel the weight of that phone call pressing on my chest. I drove aimlessly through the streets of Charleston, past tourists holding coffee cups, couples in pastel clothes, friends gathering for a celebration I was explicitly uninvited to. Every corner of this city held some memory of me. Every street whispered of the years I spent holding my family's pieces together. And now I wasn't even an afterthought. I don't know what made me do it, but before noon, I found myself parked across the street from the Belmont Hotel, the wedding venue. I had no intention of going inside, but curiosity is a cruel thing. It doesn't let you look away when you should. So I stood there, arms crossed tightly over my chest, and watched. Guests arrived in clusters, laughing, posing for photos. Everyone perfectly dressed, perfectly happy. And then I saw her. My mother. Drusilla moved through the crowd like a queen, her veil pinned perfectly, her smile rehearsed. She was speaking to the hotel manager, but her voice carried across the street, slicing through the morning like glass. "If she sets foot in here, throw her out. She's not family." She didn't say my name. She didn't have to. The words hit harder than I expected, like a punch to the ribs. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching her turn away like I was nothing but a shadow. After a few long minutes, I finally climbed back into my car, the numbness crawling over me like a second skin. I drove without direction, the streets of Charleston blurring past. Hours slipped away without me noticing. By the time the sun began to fall behind the skyline, I found myself at the waterfront. The boardwalk was nearly empty now, a few tourists lingering, the sound of seagulls fading into the breeze. I walked slowly toward the edge of the beach, the tide stretching out like something soft and cruel at the same time. And standing there, with the horizon burning gold in front of me, it finally hit me. They'd spent years carving out their perfect little world, and when I didn't fit their picture, they erased me. Fine. If they wanted me gone, I could disappear. But not on their terms. I took one long breath, letting the ocean air settle deep in my lungs. If they wanted me erased, I whispered to no one, I'll vanish, but on my own terms. That night, back in my apartment, the ache in my chest hadn't disappeared, but it felt different, heavier, sharper. And finally, I reached for the envelope Caspian had left me weeks ago, the one I'd ignored, unopened, because I wasn't ready to face whatever truth it carried. I broke the seal and unfolded the papers inside. And everything changed. I unfolded the envelope with the kind of care you'd give to something fragile, something dangerous. Caspian's handwriting stared back at me, clean, precise, almost clinical. Inside was a copy of a marriage contract. At first glance, it looked like any formal agreement. Typed lines, neat signatures, legal jargon designed to put people to sleep. But as I read, my pulse started to pound in my ears. There it was, buried deep in the clauses. Upon the completion of marriage, all shared assets, including the family estate and financial holdings, would fall solely under the control of Silas Wren, my mother's soon-to-be husband. A quiet breath slipped past my lips. I read it again, slower this time, tracing each word like I was peeling back the skin of a wound. My name wasn't there. Aurelia's name wasn't there. Only theirs, Drusilla and Silas, binding themselves together in a contract that effectively erased both her daughters from the picture. It wasn't just about the wedding anymore. This wasn't some emotional fallout or family spat. This was calculated. I leaned back on my sofa, the soft hum of the ceiling fan suddenly too loud in the silence. My mind swirled, images flashing, the cold text from Mom, Aurelia's picture-perfect Instagram post, the public rejection outside the Belmont Hotel. It wasn't personal, it was business. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it. I needed air. Pulling on a sweatshirt, I stepped outside into the Charleston night. The humidity clung to my skin like sweat, the streets mostly empty except for the occasional car rolling by. I walked without thinking, down streets I'd memorized over the years, until I reached the little cafe Caspian and I used to meet at after late shifts. That's when the memory hit. 2 weeks before the wedding, I had dropped by Mom's house to deliver floral samples she asked for. She wasn't home, but the front door was unlocked. I'd walked in, placed the samples on the kitchen counter, and noticed the study door slightly ajar. Out of habit, curiosity, or maybe something more, I peeked inside. That's when I saw it. That same marriage contract sitting on Silas's desk. It had caught my eye not because of the thick stack of legal papers, but because my mother's name was there, without mine or Aurelia's anywhere in sight. Back then, I hadn't thought much of it. I was used to being overlooked, but now, standing in the middle of an empty street, it all clicked like dominoes falling. Caspian's voice echoed in my head from a conversation weeks ago when he'd warned me. Celine, Silas did this before. 2 wives, both left with nothing but bills and heartbreak. I hadn't wanted to believe him then. I wanted to believe my mother wouldn't fall for a man who'd used, drained, and discarded women like expired credit cards. But that contract in my hand proved otherwise. I walked home slower than usual, my steps heavy with realization. By the time I reached my apartment, the ache inside me had sharpened into something colder. They didn't just leave me off the guest list. They'd left me off the entire future they were building. One where I didn't exist. Not just emotionally, but legally, financially, permanently. Every little slight, every offhand comment over the years, every time Mom brushed past me in favor of Aurelia, they weren't accidents. They were conditioning. They wanted me gone long before this wedding. The wedding was just the final act. I dropped onto the edge of my bed, staring at the ceiling fan slicing the air. They didn't just erase me, they sold me out. Somewhere beneath the dull ache in my chest, something cracked open. Not sadness, not grief. Anger. Real, bone-deep, unshakable anger. For the first time in years, I let it settle in my veins like a spark waiting for flame. This isn't over. The next morning, a new rumor about me started spreading like wildfire, and I knew exactly who lit the match. The rumor spread like wildfire, faster than I expected, but exactly how I should have known it would. By noon, 3 different people had sent me the same message, as if I hadn't already heard it whispered beneath the breath of every family member who smiled too wide and cared too little. Celine's unstable. She threatened to ruin the wedding. She's out of control. It would have been almost funny if it hadn't felt so familiar. the way my family always twisted the truth until it became a weapon. At first, I thought about letting it burn itself out. Let them talk. Let them paint me as the villain. But then Junia texted, "You should come tonight. Rehearsal dinner at the Belmont. Be seen." I stared at the screen, wondering why I should even bother. Why walk straight into the lion's den when I already knew they wanted me mauled? But something inside me, something sharp and stubborn, told me I needed to show up. Not to explain, not to plead, but to remind them I was still standing. That evening, the Belmont was glowing like a Christmas postcard. White lights strung around the columns, waiters gliding between tables with trays of champagne, everything curated to look perfect. I slipped in quietly, unnoticed at first. But eyes always find you when they want you to disappear. Caspian found me near the doorway. He didn't say much, just gave me that look, half warning, half worried. "You sure?" he asked under his breath. "They don't get to write my ending," I replied. The evening unfolded like a play. Laughter where it belonged, fake smiles exchanged like business cards. Until the groom took the microphone. Silas stood tall, smug, one arm casually draped around my mother, like he already owned her. And everything else. "To family," he started, voice honey-sweet. "Those who know when their time is over." The guests laughed, politely, nervously, but his eyes locked on mine when he added, "Some people just don't know when they're no longer needed." The smile never left his lips, but the message hit like a slap. I kept my face still, my hand tight around the glass. Then my mother took the mic. "Every mother dreams of children who bring them joy," she said sweetly. "Sadly, we don't always get what we want." Her eyes didn't leave mine. The room went silent. No one said a word. Caspian leaned in. "They're trying to break you tonight," he whispered. I set my glass down carefully and stood. The chatter faded. Forks paused midair. I walked toward the exit without looking back, until I did. My voice stayed calm even. "Be careful," I said, meeting both their eyes. "Even shadows have limits." And then I left. Outside, Charleston felt like a different world. The hum of traffic, the quiet pulse of life moving forward like nothing had happened inside that ballroom. I kept walking, letting the air cool the weight pressing on my chest. At the corner, beneath the street lamp glow, I stopped and breathed it all in. That night, lying awake, staring at the ceiling, something inside me shifted. The next move would be mine. And this time, I wouldn't play nice. 3 days before the wedding, my phone lit up before sunrise. The city outside my window was still dark, the air heavy with the kind of stillness that only comes right before something terrible happens. When I reached for the phone, half expecting another empty apology or a cold demand, I found Caspian's name instead. His message was short. "Aurelia's telling people you're trying to ruin the wedding." I sat up, the weight of those words sinking straight to my stomach like a stone. Of course she was. It wasn't enough to exclude me. Now they needed to burn my name, too. I stared at the screen, rereading the message over and over as if it would suddenly make sense. It didn't. By mid-morning, I saw the evidence for myself. 2 posts, subtle but clear enough if you knew how to read between the lines. One from one of Aurelia's friends. "Some people really can't stand seeing others happy." Another from a distant cousin. "Family drama is exhausting. Let people celebrate without your baggage." I didn't need a name tagged to know who they meant. I spent the next hour pacing the length of my living room, the same sentence rattling in my head like static. "She's telling everyone you're trying to ruin the wedding." It was the final push. Not Mom, not Silas. Aurelia. The person I thought would at least hesitate before driving the knife in. Before I could talk myself out of it, I dialed her number. She picked up after the second ring. "Celine," Aurelia said, voice cool like the static buzz of a radio signal I'd forgotten how to tune. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, skipping past the small talk, my throat tight with something dangerously close to grief. She didn't miss a beat. "You're jealous, Celine. You always have been." I blinked, the words slicing sharper than I expected. "You hate seeing Mom happy," she continued, like she'd been rehearsing the line for weeks. "You can't stand not being the center of attention." The laugh that escaped me wasn't soft. It was bitter, hollow. "You really believe that?" "You can't help yourself," she said. "You live for chaos." I swallowed the lump forming at the back of my throat, my hand tightening around the edge of the kitchen counter. She meant every word. She wasn't saying it to provoke me. She genuinely believed I was the villain in her story. We ended the call without resolution, her voice turning cold, mine turning to ice. That evening, after I closed the shop and the streets began to empty, my phone buzzed again. "Aurelia." One message this time. No flourish, no pretense. "If you really love Mom, you won't show up. Don't ruin her day." I stared at it longer than I should have, the words sinking into my bones like frostbite. "If you really love Mom," as if love meant stepping aside quietly while they erased me. I set the phone down, walked to the window, and watched the city lights flicker in the distance. I'd spent years making myself smaller so they could feel big. I'd spent even longer hoping they'd eventually see me. But this wasn't misunderstanding anymore. It was strategy. I walked back to the counter, picked up my phone, and typed slowly, deliberately. "If you keep pushing me out, don't be surprised when I stop staying quiet." I hit send and set the phone face down. Tomorrow, they'd understand what it meant when the quiet one finally spoke. The cafe was quiet when I arrived the next morning. One of those downtown places tucked between old brick buildings, smelling faintly of espresso and polished wood. The kind of place where no one paid attention to you unless you asked for it. Caspian was already there, seated at a corner table, a manila folder resting on the table like a loaded weapon. He glanced up when I walked in, and without a word, slid the folder toward me as I sat down. I pulled it open, expecting receipts or half-hearted gossip. But it wasn't that. Inside were copies of documents I hadn't seen before. Detailed records. A full copy of the marriage contract I'd first glimpsed weeks ago, but this time annotated, highlighted. And stapled neatly behind it were bank statements, court records, legal filings, a trail of Silas's past. 2 former marriages, 2 women left in financial ruin. Assets transferred quietly, systematically. I scanned the pages, my heart pounding faster with every line I read. My mother's name, the date of the wedding, the clause that effectively gave Silas control of everything, including what should have been mine and Aurelia's inheritance. When I looked up, Caspian was watching me carefully, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug. "Why are you doing this?" I asked quietly. He exhaled slowly. "Because someone should have protected you a long time ago." I swallowed, unsure how to carry the weight of that simple truth. "You've spent your whole life cleaning up their mess," Caspian continued. "Maybe it's time to clean your own slate." The words settled over me like an anchor. Heavy, grounding. For years, I'd been the one who showed up. The one who fixed things. The one who swallowed her pride so everyone else could save face. Maybe it was time to stop playing that part. I folded the folder closed carefully, like sealing something fragile, and stood. "Thank you," I said, meaning it. He nodded once. "Whatever you do next, don't do it for them. Do it for you." I left the cafe and walked back to my apartment, the folder clutched tight in my hands. The sun was high by then, the streets humming with people preparing for the wedding weekend. Delivery trucks, florists, caterers rushing in and out of venues. Charleston was dressing itself up for a show I was never supposed to be in. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and stared at the screen for a long time. And then, without hesitation, I picked up the phone and called my family's lawyer. It took 3 rings before he answered, his voice formal but polite. "Celine? What can I do for you?" I told him everything. I sent him the documents Caspian had gathered, every highlighted line, every damning clause. I explained the pattern, the way it had happened before, the way it was happening again. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. "You understand what you're asking me to do," he said carefully. "I do. You're aware this could tear your family apart?" I almost laughed. That ship had sailed a long time ago. "I want this marriage stopped," I said calmly, "and I want them to know exactly why." The lawyer hesitated. "I can prepare an injunction, but it will cause a public scene." "Good. Let it be public. Let the truth crawl out into the light." Before we ended the call, I added one last thing. "Make sure they can't erase me this time." That night, I slept differently. Not well, but with a strange kind of calm, like something inside me had finally settled. The next day, as the guests arrived in their finest clothes, the first cracks in their perfect day started to show. By noon, the Belmont Hotel looked like something out of a Southern wedding magazine. Pristine white arches, silk ribbons fluttering in the breeze, and guests arriving in their finest clothes, sipping champagne, as if nothing in the world could possibly go wrong. But I knew better. From the window of the cafe across the street, I watched them arrive. Uncles in pressed suits, cousins in pastel dresses, old family friends lining up to witness the show. They had no idea the curtain was about to fall. Inside the hotel ballroom, my mother stood radiant under the chandelier light, veil pinned perfectly, lips stretched into a smile wide enough to crack. Silas stood beside her, smug and polished as ever, one hand resting possessively on her back. The picture of happiness, if you didn't look too close. Somewhere behind them, Caspian lingered near the back of the room, his posture casual, but his gaze sharp, scanning every corner like he was waiting for the sky to cave in. It didn't take long. The first sign came in the form of two men in dark suits slipping past the crowd, moving straight toward the front. I saw the shift ripple across the room, whispers, heads turning, the tension sharp enough to slice through silk. One of the men, our family lawyer, approached my mother, leaning in close enough that only she and Silas could hear. The smile slid right off her face. Silas's jaw clenched so hard I could see it from across the street. The announcement came minutes later. The wedding ceremony had been temporarily delayed due to unforeseen legal circumstances. I almost laughed at how politely they phrased it, as if this wasn't a bomb dropped in the middle of their perfect day. The whispers spread like wildfire. By the time I crossed the street and slipped quietly into the hotel lobby, the ballroom was already unraveling. Guests shuffled uneasily, murmuring behind cupped hands. Phones were out, messages flying faster than the waitstaff could refill the champagne, and then the doors to the side hallway burst open. Silas stormed in, his face red, voice rising over the chaos. "This is her!" he shouted, pointing toward me like I was a criminal on trial. "She planted this! This is her revenge." Eyes turned toward me like floodlights. I didn't flinch. I met his gaze evenly, the calm in my chest unfamiliar but steady. People were recording now. I could see the glint of phones held up like shields, capturing every moment. Aurelia's voice came next, sharp and brittle over the crowd noise. She wasn't even in the room. It was a voicemail buzzing on my phone seconds after Silas's outburst. "You ruined everything," she snapped. "I hope you're happy. You destroyed the only family you had left." I listened to it twice, letting the words wash over me like cold rain. The thing about blame is that it always finds the easiest target. Junia's message came not long after. "They're all blaming you," she wrote, "but you did the right thing." Somewhere deep inside, I wanted to believe her. But in that moment, standing in the middle of the wreckage, all I felt was exhaustion. I thought it was over. I thought the worst had passed. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement at the front of the room. My mother had grabbed the microphone. The air in the ballroom felt heavier the moment my mother's fingers wrapped around the microphone. Her smile was gone, her posture stiff. It wasn't the poised, gracious host everyone had seen earlier. It was a woman unraveling, thread by thread, in front of an audience too stunned to look away. I stood frozen near the back, breath caught halfway in my throat. She cleared her throat, voice slicing through the nervous murmurs like broken glass. "You all came here today?" she began, her tone shaking but forced into something sweet. "To witness love. To celebrate new beginnings." Some people nodded politely, unsure where this was going. "But what no one tells you," she continued, voice rising, "is that family isn't always what it looks like in pictures." A pause, a shift. Her gaze snapped to me across the room, sharp as a blade. "From the moment she was born," my mother said, her voice cracking but clear, "Celine has been nothing but a burden." The words hit harder than I expected, like someone had knocked the wind clean out of me. The entire ballroom fell silent. You could have heard a pin drop between the gasps and uncomfortable shuffling. For a moment, I swore the chandelier above us flickered, like even the lights couldn't stand what was happening. Somewhere near the front, Caspian's jaw tightened. Junia stood frozen, her phone forgotten in her hand. I could feel everyone's eyes shift to me. The invisible daughter, the problem child, now painted plainly for all to see. I don't know how long I stood there, my heart pounding loud in my ears, before something inside me snapped. Not in anger, not even in sadness, just finality. I took a breath, straightened my shoulders, and walked slowly, deliberately, toward the front of the room. The crowd parted like water. When I reached the edge of the dance floor, I looked up at my mother, who still clutched the microphone like it was the only thing holding her up. "You wanted me erased?" I said, my voice steady, clear. "Congratulations!" I stepped back, sweeping my gaze across the stunned, whispering guests. "I'm gone." Without waiting for her reply, without so much as a glance toward Silas or Aurelia, I turned and walked away. The sound of my heels on the marble echoed louder than the shocked silence. Outside, the Charleston sun had begun to sink, the sky awash in amber and lavender streaks. The evening breeze wrapped around me like a promise of something better. By the time I reached the street, I heard the commotion behind me, more shouting, more chaos, but none of it mattered anymore. Later that night, I heard the rest through text messages and voicemails I didn't bother answering. Silas had left immediately after the ceremony collapsed, vanishing without a trace, taking with him whatever was left of their carefully curated fairy tale. The guests had scattered, many of them whispering about betrayal, scandal, bad blood. My mother's phone, according to Junia, had been ringing nonstop with reporters, relatives, friends who suddenly didn't want to be associated with the disaster. Aurelia didn't reach out, not a word, not even another blame-laced voicemail. Everything they'd built, the image, the performance, the illusion, crumbled in one afternoon. And I'd walked away from the wreckage without looking back. Weeks later, I received one last message, and it wasn't from the person I expected. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the message came. The sky over Charleston was gray that day, heavy with the kind of spring rain that threatened but never quite fell. I was sorting through invoices at my desk, half listening to a podcast playing low in the background, when my phone buzzed against the wooden surface. It was from Aurelia. I stared at the screen for a long moment before opening it. "Mom's not doing well. She keeps talking about you." That was all it said. No apology, no anger, no punctuation. Just a sentence hanging like an unfinished thought. I set the phone down and leaned back, feeling the weight of those words settle in my chest like wet sand. For weeks after the wedding collapsed, I hadn't heard a thing from either of them. I thought that silence was the end. Apparently, it wasn't. That evening, I met Caspian at a small bar near the waterfront. He slid into the booth across from me, a file tucked beneath his arm. Without a word, he passed it over. Inside was a USB drive and a short printed transcript. "One of the old housekeepers sent this to me," he explained quietly. "She thought you should know." I plugged the drive into my laptop when I got home. The recording wasn't long, just under 3 minutes, but it felt like a punch to the stomach. My mother's voice, unmistakable, cold as ice, even on tape. "Celine's unstable. She ruins everything she touches. That's why I had to keep her away." The same lie, the same cruel branding, only this time spoken casually, to someone she thought didn't matter. That's where it started. The whispers, the rumors, the unspoken explanation that made it easier for people to justify my absence at every family gathering, every milestone. Not because I was difficult, but because it was easier to believe I was broken. I closed the laptop and sat there in the dim light, listening to the quiet hum of the city outside. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It didn't destroy me. It just made everything make sense. A few days later, I drove out to the old neighborhood, past streets that used to feel like home. I parked a block away from my mother's building, stepped out, and stood there for a long time, staring at the front door I'd walked through 1,000 times before. But I didn't go in. There was nothing left to say. Somewhere between the betrayal and the lies, and the years of bending myself into shapes that would never be enough, I'd finally stopped needing her to see me. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Sometimes, it just means letting yourself live again. Before I left, I pulled out my phone and typed one last message. I hope one day you can be happy without needing to hurt me first. I didn't wait for a reply. Weeks passed. The city moved on, the gossip faded, the scandal became old news, and I started over. I reopened my flower shop, smaller this time, tucked into a quieter street, where the customers came not because of who I used to be, but because of what I could offer now. Caspian stopped by often, usually with coffee. Junia sent pictures of her kids, messages filled with laughter and updates. A different kind of family. One I chose. Some wounds don't heal perfectly, but they stop bleeding eventually. That evening, as I locked up the shop and stepped outside into the cool Charleston night, I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because I finally knew it didn't have to be. For so long, I believed that family meant sacrificing yourself to keep the peace, that if I bent far enough, stayed quiet long enough, maybe one day they'd finally see me. But here's the truth no one tells you. Sometimes, family isn't who shares your blood. It's who shows up when the room is empty, who listens without expecting you to shrink yourself to fit their story. Walking away wasn't easy. It never is. But peace doesn't come from waiting for people who keep proving they don't value you. It comes from finally valuing yourself. And now, I want to ask you something. Have you ever stayed too long in a place, a relationship, a family that kept asking you to be less just so they could feel more? What would happen if, for once, you chose yourself? Drop a 1 in the comments if this story made you stop and think about your own boundaries. Or tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story traveled. And if this story wasn't for you, that's okay too. Let me know why. Your voice matters here. And if you want to hear more real stories about family, love, loss, and finding yourself again, hit that subscribe button and join this little community we're building. Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to find a place where we belong.